Hello again, and welcome to The Future of. I'm your host, Jonathon Narvey, and today we're going to be talking about the future of smart cities with my special guests, Vaclav Vincalek and David Vogt. I'm going to do a terrible job of introducing them, so I think they should just introduce themselves. I think that's probably best for everybody. Vaclav, why don't you begin?
Hi, Jonathan. It's great to be here in this awesome studio. The view is absolutely amazing. Only Vancouver can do something like that. So my name is Vaclav, and I started numerous technology-based companies. And also with David, we started two ventures. One is called Urban Opus, and the other one is Urban Ventures Network. The first one is more non-profit, and the other one is purely for profit, where we're taking the ideas from the first and then trying to commercialize the ideas for greater good and for profit. So David can talk about them as well.
Thank you. Great to be here, Jonathan. What a wonderful place and a good time. It's very appropriate for us to be diving into the concept of the future of cities and what smart cities are. Urban Opus was really founded on the principle that everything people are hearing about smart cities is commercial hype, meaning it's companies trying to sell you things, or more appropriate, companies trying to sell cities things. There's a real opportunity for the improvement of cities, and Urban Opus was framed around not commercial value, but quality of life. And so we're looking at the same thing. Smart cities are really about data, but how can you use data for quality of life rather than commercial benefit?
What we've done with David over the years, yes, especially myself, my background is very technical. I was studying electrotechnical engineering, switching systems, phones, programming, and all these things. So I was always very, very technical. And the older you get, you realize that the technology is never really the barrier or the solution. It's always the people who have to do something, or who have the power to improve things. And I guess I get more and more sensitive when people or organizations are coming with these new brand ideas and say, only if we have so much technology here, even if we have these sensors, even if we have these computers who will solve all our problems, life will be beautiful, life would be awesome. And from my experience, I can tell you that it's rarely the case that we really, really need new technology. We have enough technology right now to improve things for betterment of the humanity, if you will. And living in cities is definitely one of them.
You have a wonderful way of breaking down technology in a way that not just business people can understand, but laymen like myself can understand. So it's something that I have very much enjoyed and admired about you over the years, because you really have to understand technology on a deep level in order to be able to explain it in that way. David, I was wondering if can you give the audience maybe another minute or so, just a bit more on your own science background.
Sure. I am a scientist by original training. I have a PhD in astronomy, and I was director of the University of British Columbia observatories, both geophysical and astronomical. And that was my first love. But it's a highly technical area, if you think about that. Astronomy was really the first science that got overwhelmed by data far before computer science came along, because you have these telescopes collecting enormous amounts of data from space, and you have to understand what you're looking at and where it's going, and how it can feed you something that's useful information. I still love the sciences deeply. I translated that love of sciences actually into being a director at Science World, the Public Science Museum in Vancouver. That was when my children were younger, and so therefore creating and designing programs for public interaction and building education value as well as community value. And some of the programs that I started there actually, surprisingly enough, rolled off into companies. And one company I jumped out and led. And ever since then, I've been in the kind of digital space and creating startups. So you could say that I began in outer space, got lost, and ended up in cyberspace. And that sense that it's the same vast, infinite, area of opportunity, except for cyberspace, it's already populated by humans. And so it's not like we're looking for aliens everywhere. The humans are already there, and you can actually change space around to create great value for people. That's always been inspiring for me.
Well, that's an excellent part for me to segue back into the meat of our discussion around smart cities, because it's all about humans making living situations, making urban environments, and not just urban environments, we'll get into rural environments as well, more livable for us ordinary humans, or maybe in your case, extraordinary. So let's, just for the audience, define what we're talking about with smart cities when most observers are talking about it, because it's increasingly a trending topic. And I'd like you to talk about how you view it differently, because you both don't take a conventional view, if that can be said, of what a smart city is and what it could be.
Sure,
David?
I'll take a stab at that, Jonathan. I think the conventional view, and this is one we share, is that smart cities have something to do with improving cities through the use of data. So it's mass data or big data that will come along and somehow or another make a change. The conventional view, which is primarily a corporate view, is to imagine a city as a machine. And if you only have sensors in every part of the machine feeding into some kind of central processor, you can make the machine more efficient. So you can think of transportation or energy grids or water or anything like that. All those elements of infrastructure becoming more efficient for that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that cities aren't machines. Cities are crucibles for humanity. And so how can you actually look at data being something that improves quality of life? And quality of life is a lot more important than whether I can find a parking space, right? The quality of life is much more than what the smart city, marketing is doing. And the smart city marketing is not, again, wrong from a corporate point of view. Upwards of 80% of any city's budget is spent on engineering, which is roads and sewers and everything else. And so it's not surprising that large corporates are selling cities, well, if you put these sensors here and put sensors there, you can have marginal savings on all of these things. You can make them better. But from the city's point of view, that's engineering, and that's about the machine model. They don't get into the messy problem of quality of life for people who inhabit the cities, because it's troublesome around security, privacy, all the rest of those things that people, are beginning to become wary of, and cities don't want to go there. And so the corporate side and the government side only want to look at that machine model. Vaclav and I both say this is the time we need to be looking at the human part of the city. And not only that, how can humans participate actively in this? How can data be the new oxygen of cities, so that people breathe in and out to actually make their lives better and more inspired? And there are lots of ways for that to happen, but it's about interaction design and creating ways that people can feel secure, feel safe, feel like they are contributing something at the same time, feeling like they're being part of a city. If I can wander on a little bit further, one of the huge problems of modern cities is that people feel lonely. People feel unincluded. And that's bizarre when you think that there's thousands of people within a few hundred yards of them. And so, that sense of how can we use these kind of technologies to inform people, to engage people, to allow them to feel they belong and that they are being creative and appreciated and that their lives have opportunity. All of those things can be enhanced with data.
So we've covered this in a very sort of high level and almost a philosophical level. That was terrific. I was wondering, Vaclav, can you break down maybe on a more, just with some examples, how this could apply, how some of those problems are manifesting currently, either in, I guess, I don't know, you would call them dumb cities, or cities that have not implemented smart cities as it's conventionally understood, and then so maybe an example or two of that of how these problems are manifesting, and then how your vision of smart cities could work through Urban Opus. The kind of your methodology is a bit different.
Okay, yes, good question, Jonathan. So. First of all, as David alluded, the term smart city came out of, if I'm not mistaken, IBM advertising, because they created the Smart Planet, Smart City, and it was actually a hugely successful campaign for IBM. And it became the meme which everybody took and started running with it without really comprehending what it means. And as with all labels, it became unclear what actually constitutes smart city, and how can you recognize that you live in smart city, or do you feel that your city is so stupid you cannot even live there? And when you talk to people, usually they don't refer to the city as being idiotic. Usually they refer to the local governments. So that's the first inclination that the label of smart city is. I don't think it's working to begin with, because it's difficult to really measure what it's supposed to. What is the panacea of having smart city? How it's going to look like? And so and this is where we had numerous conversations with David. If it's not smart city, how would you describe what smart city is or what it's supposed to be? And one suggestion is that it can be called open city, because all the conversations which people have about smart cities, it's about what can we do for the people living in smart city.
Could you break that down? You have a good example, one with trees and
yeah.
allergies.
So that's one thing. So, but talking about first the open city. Shouldn't we judge the city or the environment where we live, how welcoming is for anybody coming from the outside? Because you already know how to live in Vancouver. You already know the streets. You already know the public transportation. You already know where the schools are or any facilities. But somebody who arrives by plane, train, car, so how long does it take them? So let's say you are immigrant family, you get, it's Monday afternoon, you arrive on a plane to Vancouver International Airport, and now what? Where are you going to stay? What are you going to eat? Where are you going to put your kids in school? Where are you going to work? Like, how long does it take you to get assimilated in the city so you are a fully functional citizen in that city? So, because we always talk about smart cities as the perspective from the inside within the city itself, but we don't consider when people coming from the outside what it's going to do to them. And I think that's even more important than for people living there, because they already know how to live there. They were able to live here for, how old is Vancouver? Hundreds of years. So that's one aspect. And to also what David was talking about, the sensors, the well-oiled machine. We have very good examples how actually it's the people who can become the sensors for the city. Some time ago, I was on a tour through Europe, and we were visiting various cities and talking with entrepreneurs there. And one application, which I'm still referring to, and it's now, 4 years old, was built for people who were disabled in wheelchairs. And this application was as the person in the wheelchair would embark on the daily tour through the city, grocery shopping, going to work, what have you. So they would turn on the application, and the application through GPS and the accelerometer in the phone, in the smartphone, would map not only where they were going, but the quality of the road they were traveling on. And so now, if the city would be really that smart, as they try to portray themselves, they would encourage every single person in a wheelchair to use this application. So they would get real-time data how disabled people are traveling through any city. And suddenly they would see that there are places that the disabled people never go to. And then they can discover that there is no access without a barrier, or the sidewalk or the road is not good enough to go there. And they can start really actually adjusting the city for people who live there. So that's one example which, again, it points to we don't need to buy millions of sensors. We just need to provide the opportunity for people to collect data and then return it back to the city, and the city can act on it. So this is the real-time loop, which would benefit the people who live there, and then the city responsibility then to be adjusted based on the data as the citizens are providing. And there are many companies which, even we have some in Vancouver, who claim that they can gather opinion from their citizens. Well, we know how surveys, how well they are working. Not really. And how many people really fill the survey with information which is meaningful to anything, and usually nothing, right? So this is where the city is very poorly trying to gather information. I'll give you another example. City of Vancouver, the past mayor, they tried to they started goal with increase the green space in Vancouver by I don't know how many percent by planting all the trees. Sounds like an amazing idea to have a green city. Yes, we will be the greenest city. Well, I'm sure that you know that there are people with allergies living in the city. So do you know which trees cause what allergy to people who live in that area? So if you would start gathering data from people who live in neighborhoods, whether they have allergy this day, that day, and then start correlating with the type of greenery it's around them, you would suddenly realize that you cannot plant certain trees in certain areas because it will be highly detrimental to people living in that area, because who would be really benefiting is the pharma industry, because they would sell more pills to get rid of the allergy. So these are a few examples how we don't need more technology. We just need to use the technology which we have now in much smarter way and provide real benefits to real citizens living in the city.
Well, that seems like a smart way, or smarter way, to design a smart city with more of an opt-in approach. Maybe, David, maybe you could talk about what you're currently seeing in implementations of smart cities in North America or abroad. Where, sort of a contrast with your model, how things are going. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. The typical implementations of smart city technology are in massive infrastructure monitoring and maintenance pieces. So, again, transportation is a huge one. Energy is another huge one. The problem with that, to think of these data collecting pieces as, well, there's several of them, but as a new infrastructure for the city, is that they are very expensive to implement, but much more expensive to maintain. So if you think of, we put sewers in a city, well, sewers will last for 100 years. You put a sensor into, a sewer, and it'll need to be changed in 2 to 3 years. The lifetime of the technology goes over very quickly, and so that's why it's such a corporate model. If you implement this, to make it work, you have to spend far more to keep up. Whereas this is where the human in the loop argument that Vaclav started to get into is so important, because if you think that the best sensor in a city has 2 legs and is walking around, is actually already highly intelligent, and their smartphone that they have is a wonderful data collector and sharer, there's already a huge incentive in place for those smart people to upgrade their smart sensors all the time because they want the best new phone. And so they're going to have the best technology for collecting. What you have to engineer around that is what data are being collected, what is the human's part in making a decision in that, so that they're not being observed and they feel their privacy and security is being maintained, but also how they build social capital for participating in this. For instance, on the negative side, there are cities like Shanghai who put in, enormous sensor bases for smart cities, but a lot of it has to do with facial recognition, so they can know where every one of their citizens is all the time. And, well, that's not really what I think most people in North America or most people in the world want, period. And so if you're about monitoring people and controlling people and so on, that's the wrong way for an infrastructure to go. And so those models for, how we allow data to be collected and shared. For instance, something that Vaclav and I have been working on for a while, this is Vaclav's, one of his pet projects, is a city like Vancouver could make enormous amounts of headway in this area with a very simple model of saying, okay, Uber, come to town. Lyft, come to town. Foodora, come to town. Part of your operating license in this city is that you have to share your aggregated, anonymized data openly with everyone else. So we can understand where this is going. It's not going to be any kind of impediment for you making money in your business, because we're not going to take any of your material, but you have to share this data so that we can start moving this together. Imagine how, for instance, all of the car sharing information mixed with all the bike sharing information, mixed with all the information that's come forward from citizens in wheelchairs, could mix with transit information to actually create a much better mobility for everybody involved. But right now, transit is completely excluded from the people in the wheelchairs information, from the car-to-go information, from all the rest, because there isn't a trusted broker. There's no broker in place where you can say, this data is clean, meaning it's usable and it's high quality, but it's also, there's no individuals who can be identified in this. There's no private information that's being gone away. It is, but it's still valuable. And there's no organization yet that's actively collecting and sharing valuable data about a city for the public good.
Mm. So everything both of you are saying makes a ton of sense. And, if we're comparing the two models of smart cities, on the one hand, you've got a version that is The technology is siloed. It's extremely expensive to implement. It's inefficient. It's not very open. Your data is being seen. Security is a huge issue, and you can at worst you could envision sort of a Beijing model of privacy or lack thereof implemented here. So that's on the one hand, that's one version of a smart city, almost a dystopian version. And on the other hand, you've got your model, which is opt-in, open. It's relatively efficient and cost-effective to do this. It just sounds, on an intuitive level, that this seems, you've explained it very simply. How is this not already taking off, or maybe it is? What's the next step for Urban Opus to guide this model forward?
We take an experimental approach. We are working with organizations to implement projects on an urban scale, but rather than taking a machine model for a city, our model is a city is a community of communities. And so it's based on trust, meaning the average citizen is not going to trust their data about where they're traveling, for instance, with City Hall. Why would they think City Hall would want to do that? But they might trust it if they travel by bicycle with their bicycle club, right? And so that's a community. That's a community of interest for them. Or the wheelchair people would share their data with their wheelchair support group, or people that are into different activities. They all belong to a whole set of intersecting, a wonderful tapestry of communities that make up a city. If each one of those communities within a city were enabled to serve their people better using data and trickled up the data, we believe that's where smart is going to grow. And it's going to be cultivated. And so our process is project by project, app by app. We believe that cities will grow as a community of communities, or a community of smart communities. A smart city is a community of smart communities where people are engaged and inspired to share their lives, breathing data like oxygen, as I said earlier.
Sure. So we're talking about communities really at any scale, and that's part of what interested me about the Urban Opus model. And you've talked about not just applying this on a city-wide scale. Smart city, again, is a bit of a misnomer in that we can apply this to rural areas as well. I wonder, Vaclav, did you want to speak to that?
Yes. And to also tag along what David was saying, when you ask somebody, random person on the street, like, do you know what smart city is? I would wager my bet that most people say, oh, you mean like there's no traffic, the traffic will flow really nicely. That's answer for most people, that's the answer, because they understand, and understandably so, because if you're sitting in traffic, you'd like the traffic to go better, rather than thinking even further how to change the transportation in the city. And rather than using the stick that, we have to get people out of the car, why don't you create better opportunity how they can move through the city? I don't know about any app which you can wake up in the morning and you can say, today I'd like to get from home, I'd like to go to work, and it's a beautiful day, and I can take leisurely time to get there. And the app would say, great idea. So you will walk for 10 minutes here. This is where you can get your rent bike, and then you can ride on seawall or, through some neighborhoods, and then you can get to your office. Traveling time will be 45 minutes, and it will cost you $2. Sometime you wake up and say, I'm in really rush, I need to do this. Yes, Uber is already on its way with Lyft, and then combination with SkyTrain or in some cities it's metro, whatever you call it, subway, and you get to your destination and it will cost you $20 and you get there in half time. So rather than telling people how they should live their lives, this is where the smart city, if we still stay with the name, should offer you the opportunity to make your own choice. And I think that's where, again, we're missing a lot. But going to your, question about the rural thing, without the anything outside of boundaries of the cities, that's where actually we're getting the food. This is where we're getting all the produce and everything coming to the cities. So cities have the vested interest into support these rural communities as much as they can, because the more people you have in the cities, the more resources you need to get into the city. And to provide equal opportunity also for people living in the rural areas, it's in the best interest of everybody. Because we know that living on a farm, I have limited knowledge about that. I experienced many summers when I was little to live in countryside, and I know it's a very difficult life. And less people are inclined or willing to do that. So, this is another part of, I like to get strawberries. Well, do you know actually how difficult it is to grow strawberries? Do you know how difficult it is to pick them up and get to your local store? So the integration between city and anything outside of the city is critical, and no solution for smart city can be full or properly implemented without integration of the areas outside of the city.
I was wondering if we could just pick up, we're almost out of time actually, so the last point I wanted to get to, and David, maybe you can talk about this, is, this doesn't just apply when we're talking about smart cities to North America, Canada, USA. This can be a global phenomenon. What kind of impact could a smart city of the kind you both have been discussing, what kind of an impact could that have on the world and the cities where we live?
That's a great question, Jonathan. We see the world as roughly 10,000 cities, of a Vancouver size or above. That's a lot of cities. That's a huge number of people. And humanity is flocking to cities all over the world. We believe that by 2050, 70% plus, probably closer to 80% of humanity is going to be living in those cities. And from a technology point of view, they're likely going to be very cookie cutter, meaning they have the same kinds of infrastructure. Everybody has, for instance, one of half a dozen different smartphones or all of those type of things, even though within them they have very different cultures, religions, and communities to support that. And so we see that an app, for instance, that's developed in Budapest and works for a set of wheelchair people there can be easily transposed into a community in Vancouver and moved anywhere else. And so we see the world of cities as being an incredibly fertile place because there are so many bright people, and that the model for smart cities as machines organized by central bodies like city government is completely unscalable, so they will be making the cities better for themselves. We see that fertility of cities around the world being just an amazingly great thing, and it's going to be happening very quickly. That's why we are on a project basis. We will plant a seed here, we'll plant a seed there, we'll organize these, but in the long run, as long as the data frontier remains open, which again isn't guaranteed, this will go in the right direction.
And to add to what David is saying, every single time you talk about smart cities, you hear companies complaining that the city is not buying the greatest technology solution from them. well, show me city in the world which says we have so much money we don't know what to do with it. Every city is constantly budget constrained. Every city is always fighting to just keep the infrastructure going. And so the illusion that cities or the governments, the city governments, will be able to pay for these new things, again, it's an illusion. The process, it's a political process, it's a money constraint issue. So, again, there is a place for the government to define policies, the fair play ground. So anybody can come to Vancouver. As we were saying, Uber can come here, Lyft can come here, anybody can come here. There should be the same policy for everybody applying, including sharing the data. So you have for-profit company which is playing by well-defined rules, which the city can enforce with the help of other level of governments. So now if you extrapolate that and say, okay, I have an entrepreneur who proves application that it's profitable in one city, it can easily scale suddenly to 10,000 cities around the world. So if you think about scalability and global reach for all the innovators around the world, this is suddenly a gigantic opportunity of reaching out to, I don't want to say unlimited customer base, but fairly sizable customer base. So we know that cities will grow. An example, in Vancouver, how many people are biking more every year? There's more and more people biking all the time. So if you have an application which you provide to all the people who cycle, provide them value for the data they supply you by using smartphone carrying every day, so you know exactly how the people on bicycles are moving through the city. And based on that, you can start making other decisions, whether it's for public good or commercial good. And then you can take immediately the same concept and you can multiply in 10,000 cities around the world. And if Vancouver has about, million people, and we're talking about 10,000 or cities which have million and more up, you suddenly start getting into hundreds of millions, billions. So this is suddenly your opportunity. So this is where we see that the smart city should not be equal to charity or non-profit organizations or just depending on government paying for the solutions. Quite contrary, it can be highly profitable. So we are not saying that anything with to do with smart cities, it should be charity or non-profit only, quite contrary. But if the data which are shared with everybody else in these cities will help people to improve their lives there, then everybody will be winner.
Well,
let me give one practical example, if I may, along the lines of what we talk about. There is no city in the world who can afford to properly serve the people, the citizens of that city who go by wheelchairs. They may make noises about it, but they try to do their best, but they don't have the budgets to do that. But the citizens of one city who are in wheelchairs can work together with a simple app to collect data to make lives better for themselves. And if that app works in one city, it'll work in 10,000 other cities, all of which have people with wheelchairs. And all of a sudden, you've massed all of the people of a single interest who can't be served by their city to serve themselves on a global scale. And that's exciting. And that's a proposition that matters.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to the prospect of living in a smarter city. So I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We're pretty much out of time, unfortunately, because I have about a million other questions for you. So before we get into part two, you guys are here for another hour, right? Maybe I'll just remind the audience I've been speaking with Vaclav Vincalek and David Vogt of Urban Opus. Before we go, Vaclav, if you have a public persona where you'd like people to reach out to you, what would that be?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to find me and connect with me. So yeah, LinkedIn is fine. That's how you can find me and connect with me. And I'm looking forward to connect with anybody who has the interest in smart cities and how to make technology better for humanity.
Excellent. And David?
Anybody who wants to connect with us at Urban Opus, it's urbanopus.net, and all the contact points are there.
Perfect. Well, it has been a genuine pleasure speaking with both of you, and you have been listening to The Future of Smart Cities. I'm your host, Jonathon Narvey, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening.